Work session. We are here today to receive information about the county food systems initiatives, and we'll be hearing from staff about that. For reminder for anybody who's with us in person or might be listening online, this is for informational purposes only. All of our work sessions are. We do not have a public comment section specific to this work session, but you're welcome to join us at our 5:30 business meeting later this evening and provide any comments you might have during general public comment. Otherwise, I will turn it over to staff, and I'm looking at Kim and Connie to let them introduce their team and kick it off.
Commissioner, it's a pleasure to be here this afternoon. I'm Kim Krenner Ritchie, Sustainability Manager, and I'm going to allow my colleagues to introduce themselves.
Connie Fiorella Fitzpatrick, Food Systems Specialist.
And my name is Quinlan Carter. I work for Douglas County Extension, and I'm here in my capacity as co-chair of the Douglas County Food Policy Council and member of the Economic Development Working Group.
Okay, just as a reminder, and for those listening, the Sustainability Office is a division of county administration. Our work typically falls within three broad collaborative focus areas of climate adaptation, food systems, and open space conservation. But today we're going to take a closer look specifically at the food system sector. While we are going to provide some examples of initiatives to help make the work more tangible so that we can have a rich discussion, our purpose really isn't to tell any one story of initiative or to dig into the details of any given one of those, but to prompt discussion and to have kind of an exploratory alignment conversation. So we're going to try, as we go through these initiatives, to highlight where the work came from, or how did it originate? What form did it take? So what did the work look like? And what were the outcomes or contribution to the food system? And we'll go through just kind of a diverse variety of those. And as we do that, we'll ask you to kind of think about, are there new or enhanced ways that you would like to see food systems initiatives align with other county priorities? Are you hearing about food systems issues as you're out in the community that you're not hearing talked about here today? Are there other ways that you'd like to interact with this topic or have us bring it to you? So noodle on those as we share, and I'm going to pass it over to Connie.
Thank you, Kim. Just checking. Is that good? Yes, so I'll reintroduce myself, Connie Fiorella Fitzpatrick, Douglas County Food Systems Specialist, and one large part of my role is to serve as the staff liaison for the Douglas County Food Policy Council, and also to advance our local food system. And we do that through a variety of forms, some which include building partnerships. Sometimes it looks like grant management. Sometimes it looks like hosting a food fellow. So there are plenty of ways that staff and the council work on advancing our local food system. And on the screen, you will see our infographic of our local food system, which touches many sectors and points across our work. Just a reminder, the Douglas County Food Policy Council is a joint advisory board focused on advising our elected officials on food systems policy and serve as a convener. The council is led by two co-chairs. We have here Quinlan Carter and also Ben Sykes serve as the co-chairs. A good bulk of the work is done through focus groups, which are right now our active working groups are Food and Farm, Economic Development, and the Indigenous Foodways Working Group, which is the most recently established working group in 2024. The Douglas County Food Policy Council is very active with the Kansas Food Action Network. and also is the most mature council in the state, being the first one being formed in the state of Kansas. And now it follows and works with over 30 local food and policy councils across the state, representing 73% of Kansas. And also Kansas happens to have the most food and farm councils per capita in the states. Through the Kansas Food Action Network, all of these councils convene monthly through virtual calls to learn about how to advance our local food system, but also collaborate. Other 2 points of contact with this network is usually in the first quarter of the year, Kansas Food Action Network hosts an advocacy day, which you see a picture here, and food and farm councils across the state come to Topeka and share with their representatives on their food systems work. And the second convening in person, it's their annual CAFIN convening, where all of these councils, usually leadership and staff, attend to vote on a collective state legislative statement, which then is brought back to food policy councils and then may become recommendations for our elected officials and may become part of, for example, our Douglas County legislative statement. As I mentioned, this is a pretty mature council. Our food system plan was one of the first in Kansas, and it was developed almost 10 years ago, so in 2017. And we have 5 guiding goals, overarching goals that we work towards, not just as the council or staff, but also our partners and across the county use this plan to advance our food system. One example, initiative example, on how the food system plan is being advanced, and also other county initiatives such as equitable entrepreneurship or the E3 work that we started in 2023 is through food entrepreneurship and the mobile food vendor policy that the council and staff have worked on, along with many different partners like the SBDC, Network Kansas, the Chamber, Lawrence Restaurant Association, and many more. This work started in 23 at the same time as the equitable entrepreneurship E3 work was being developed. It started with community input, the development of a report which is also linked in the agenda, titled the Mobile Food Vending Permitting and Policies Report, which looked at all of Douglas County's mobile food vending or food truck policies. Then suggested some recommendations. One of the recommendations was focused on the City of Lawrence ordinance on food trucks, mostly because the rest of the county had really flexible and accessible mobile food vending policies. And at the time, the City of Lawrence had an ordinance that only allowed food trucks to vend for 3 hours at a time. And thinking about equity and how it is quite difficult to start with a brick and mortar. The first step would be to enter the food business. It would be most accessible through a food truck, and 3 hours is not enough. So staff, council members, and the City of Lawrence worked on changing from the vending hours from 3 to 12. So thinking back at the equitable entrepreneurship E3 format, which starts with community, then changing policy, and also suggests for education and access to capital as part of a system to advance equitable entrepreneurship. So then came a partnership with Network Kansas and a pilot of the Foodpreneur Bootcamp that launched in 24 and expanded statewide in 2025. So just as a reminder, the council doesn't necessarily manage programming, but they can start something and then they can pass it on to partners. So continuing with education and access for food entrepreneurs, the one-on-one guide on how to establish a mobile food vendor in Douglas County was developed by actually Quinlan in the Economic Development Working Group. And it was developed in both English and Spanish. Thanks to our Douglas County Propio services, we were able to translate it and have that available online. And following with all of the relationships built, we are also working on the World Cup training focused on food safety, fire safety, and big crowd management.
Okay, so I'm going to give you kind of a date. Oops. All right, I'm going to give you a dated example, but it's a good illustration because it shows this through line of how work came to the Food Policy Council and to staff, and then kind of evolved into this large community effort. But this farmer market initiative dates back to 2015, when a community organization came to the Food Policy Council and basically expressed a food system challenge that they were having to do with the space for their market. This really prompted staff and the expertise of the Food Policy Council to discuss and collaborate and realize that, there's some research questions here. What are the other markets in Douglas County experiencing? Are they experiencing the same things or different challenges? What's the value to residents of our farmers markets? What's the economic value of our farmers markets? What are other communities like us doing in regard to farmers markets? So, some big research questions that we realized were kind of meaty, and we're able to locate a grant opportunity through USDA that was a good fit for this investigation. And so the county did apply for that grant, received, and then managed that study, and that produced research and results that is still circulating around the community today. So some very robust learning that then has been able to be widely shared and continue to inform food system development. So just that trajectory from raising a community issue to staff putting some work into a grant and then being able to let the work continue in the community. I think that's a really good illustration. So I wanted to bring that one up.
Another initiative using both advancing the food system plan and the Douglas County Health Improvement Plan is this focus area of advancing food security through SNAP access. In 2025, the Sustainability Office applied to get a K-State Research Food Fellow. Along with our partners at K-State Extension, also obtained a food fellow. And we were both working on advancing our Douglas County Health Improvement Plan. Our office was focused on the retail side and how to make it more accessible for retailers, independent retailers, to accept SNAP. And that is a mixture of CSAs, independent farmers, farmer stands, culture-specific grocers, all kinds of independent retailers. And what are some solutions to SNAP EBT access from the retailer perspective? 2025, the goal was to advance this, take on the recommendations provided by this report with partners, and we had to shift. A lot of this work had to shift largely because our original plan changed due to federal and state policies, decreasing access to SNAP, and we had to convene and instead of following our already set plans, just act in the moment and support our food security organizations and what their current need is. So as I had mentioned before, the council serves as a convener, and with partnership with LiveWell, K-State Extension, and the coalition that advanced the Douglas County Health Improvement Plan, we co-created the Mobilizing Food Systems Workshop to address current needs for our food insecurity working groups and organizations that support our food insecurity community members that are facing food insecurity. Another initiative example is that I would say this one, the Indigenous Food System Study and Action Plan, comes from addressing a gap in our food system plan, though equity and access to culture-specific foods are mentioned in our food system plan. There's not much studies or policies that address tribal members or indigenous communities in Douglas County, especially being so close to our Kansas tribes. This work started with farmers coming over to the council, and the council also beginning to work with our other extension office, which is the Haskell Indian Nations University Extension. So we have KC Extension and Haskell Extension, and starting to build those relationships. We also had a farmer at our Common Ground Farm to bring up the who was indigenous and bring up this idea of this need. Then staff applied for a Kansas Health Foundation grant, which was granted in 2024, and the work started. So it's been a multi-year work, largely because we have had to build relationships, both with KU Indigenous focus groups, Haskell, community members, and bringing all of that together to collectively develop this report, along with hiring local Indigenous leaders to coordinate this effort with partners. And doing all of this work indigenously. So as you see, the logo of this initiative includes the medicine wheel for directions. There's a river represented, sage or sweetgrass around it, and the circle around it that has activities, priority, which inform the priority areas, strategies, and the implementation is a framework that was developed by local Indigenous food leader Brett Ramey. So these are kinds of ways that we are advancing our food system. As you see, some are filling in the gaps, some are acting to the moment, and some are longer term plans, but all merge different plans and commitments of the county.
Okay, well, those are the examples we have prepared for you, commissioners. So we are ready for your questions or for your feedback. Please feel free to ask questions of Quinlan. We have a Food Policy Council member here who may have a different perspective and insight than staff as well. So,
Thank you for the presentation. I noticed on page 10, your guiding framework, on the second bullet, it says conservation of natural resources and protection of working lands. Can you talk a little bit more about that work and any of the initiatives that actually play into that work, and or if there aren't any, that's fine. I'm just kind of curious then, is there advocacy around conservation of natural resources and protection of working lands, and or does your team weigh in whenever the county and or cities are engaging in projects where you should have a voice in the conservation of natural resources and protection of working lands?
so Connie, I believe she's referring to goal 2 in the food system plan. I can weigh in too, but is there anything that you want to say first?
In particularly for the Food Policy Council, the council is an open council and welcomes community voices and input. In the past, we have had community members come for letters of support that are being reviewed by the council. And if it seems to be fitting within the food system plan, those are looked through and potentially provided a letter of support for those initiatives. I think one of them included even positions that do support conservation. For example, I believe the council provided a letter of support for NRCS extension of staff.
the conservation strategies in Goal 2, also, we have bled them into our open space plan as well. There was a Food Policy Council member that served on our advisory committee for the development of the open space plan, as well as other agricultural voices. So we are bringing them into other areas of our work where land is central. And we've had farmers serve on the Food Policy Council as well. So we are, bringing in those voices and that expertise. The Food Policy Council was consulted on, just to give it a policy example, was consulted early on in the development of the solar regulations. So not necessarily an individual project, although I know that they have written letters about individual projects, but more in the formation of the regulations and considerations to go into that. So that's one example where their expertise was called on.
Do you have any interaction with the growing garden over in Eudora?
Or a giving garden?
Yeah, whatever.
We have been in contact, in conversation. I believe one of their founders actually was on the Food Policy Council for a while, so we had that connection going. But it's not a regular ongoing relationship.
The other question I had, maybe this is for Sean or Sarah or somebody, but is there any county land that could be used for community gardens?
Most of the community garden work has been on City of Lawrence owned land inside the city. It was really it was a cooperative with them. The county owned land, it's something I think, we could explore, but since it's a more rural setting, it's not necessarily the same thing as a community garden, but I think it's something that we could talk about. How does space become available for use? It's something that I think we could maybe future consider, but we don't have as much land maybe as most of them are either inside a park or those types of things.
One more question related to conservation of natural resources and protection of working lands. Does your team have any future plans of weighing in on any future developments?
I would just say, to that question, part of the comprehensive plan within 2040 kind of gets into a little bit of the food systems plan. So there, as the planning sort of efforts around the county integrate some of the other adjacent plans, that's where we typically would find that type of integration and conversation. Is just, again, the comprehensive plan being this sort of big umbrella, but it's fed with a lot of this other engagement work that's being done. So the food systems plan is part of that. As far as advocacy, that's probably, I guess I would just say that that's probably the most effective way of doing that, again, is taking this from a public engagement document, incorporating it into another public engagement. So you have that continuity of those conversations.
And if I could give another example, what came to mind was the zoning diagnostic, which I know that conversation was brought to this group recently. So that's an example of a policy review. And I know they're in early stages, but when they get later in the stage, the Sustainability Office will be poised to collaborate with them on if there is opportunity for any advice or enhancements on code that could lend to land conservation in a way that is congruent across our values and our plans and things. So the sensitive lands definition includes lots of different landscapes, but it does include agricultural land as well. So I just bring that up as an example of where our office can play a role in the functions of the county to achieve some of these big buckets of sustainability in things that the county is already doing every day.
Okay, so you are a stakeholder that is being interviewed or part of the process for the diagnostic review?
Well, I wouldn't say for the diagnostic review, but when the recommendations yes, we are collaborative with other departments and ready to help and jump in wherever sustainability can be furthered in the functions of Douglas County.
Okay,
So-
but at this time, you're not on the list to be interviewed, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, sustainability was actually part of, so we interviewed, brought together technical stakeholders to be part of that conversation. Sustainability, I think Kim was part of that discussion. She's actually part of the core team that's working with Clarion. We had a meeting earlier today, as a matter of fact. So yeah, the voices are being heard in that context related to that diagnostic review. Again, no decisions are being made through that process. It's just informative and will be brought back to you all for consideration on next steps and implementation if we want to move on to the next step.
Thank you.
So Commissioner Anderson brought up a question that sort of relates to a question I had when looking through this, to pull on that thread of the sort of second bullet point under the guiding framework about the conservation of natural resources and protection of working lands. Really, my question is about the fact that you pointed out earlier, Kim, this food system plan is coming up on 10 years old. I love our little food systems dashboard, and I've revisited it over the years for reference of information. And there's some great data charts and graphics on there that have tracked some of that stuff. So I think my question is sort of twofold. One, a lot of those data sets, for example, are through 2020 seems to kind of be like the last time that there's a few in there that have up through 2021 maybe, but seems like it's been a solid 5 years since any new data has been sort of assessed and evaluated there. So I'm curious if the Food Policy Council has any plans or thoughts about whether or not there's value in adding new up-to-date, more updated information, or maybe there's a reason that we don't have that data yet and can't publish it. So that's one question. And then the bigger question about updates is just that now that you're coming up on 10 years, and specifically, related to this conservation goal, back in 2017, we didn't have the open space plan, we didn't have the climate action plan yet. And so when I read through our food systems plan, and so much of what I think is sort of maybe some initial seeds of conversations that turned into the open space plan and climate action plan, which really elaborate much more extensively on some of the things that I think you're asking about, Commissioner Anderson, and some of the themes about natural resources and whatnot. So I'm curious if you all have had thoughts or conversations about basically a need to update the food system plan in the nearish future, identifying different goals, other goals. And maybe if that one stood out to me as, I wonder if they think that, I wonder if the Food Policy Council feels like that's a core function or a core focus area, or does it feel like because, the climate action plan and the open space plan have started to develop more ideas and more strategies with more focus area, does that make you all feel differently about keeping it here in the food systems plan? So that was a lot of me thinking out loud. So if I can clarify any of that, let me know. But I'd just be interested to hear your feedback about sort of the timeline of those things and refocusing goals in general.
I'll jump in because I just think your question is wonderful, and it's why we're here. And you've articulated it really well that, when we have plans and you have a decade of growth within that plan, it's always a good opportunity to take a little bit of a, look through the rear view mirror to just say, where have we come from? So that's why you've kind of gotten the, framework that you have with respect to, again, we're operating with the food systems plan. We have certain collaborative efforts with the Food Policy Council and others to advance that work. Here's the work that we're doing, and is that aligning with what you all believe to be the strategies and goals of the food systems plan? So I want to frame it that way a little bit, because that's exactly what we're kind of pulling out of here a little bit, but I'm going to turn that over to the technical folks that are doing that work and have them weigh in.
Yeah.
Like Sean mentioned, I'm really excited to hear your feedback on how to advance the work of the Food Council as it's reaching, the food system plan is reaching 10 years, and it's a 10-year plan. But the conversations that we have had on the data that's on the food system plan and also on the dashboard is to truly assess what has been happening. We need to convene with all of our food system leaders, whether that is in food security or entrepreneurship, preservation, farmers, everyone, to see where we're at. I think that we can still update the website, of course, but there's a bigger conversation. I would also like to add that there's so much of the food system plan that is still very relevant. Yes.
Just to add on the data, a lot, I think all the data that is on the dashboard is pulled from external sources. So that's one of kind of our main limitation. And the 2020 date that I know a lot of it comes through is through the census, through the agricultural census. And so we've recognized that, not only has time limitations, but also, people have to participate in that process in order for us to pull their data. So, one option could be if it seemed like, a need would be to do another localized food system assessment, which we had, which the county did in conjunction with developing the food system plan. So that has been done before, and you'll see the graphs in the food system plan, and those are localized data that came from that process. So in order to, as Connie mentioned, like the qualitative convening would certainly be an important part of doing another assessment, but it would be a process.
Well, yeah, that makes sense to me, and I kind of affirmed some of my assumptions, so I appreciate that. And I think, let me be clear in saying that I'm not complaining that there's not new data or updated. I assumed that the census data tracks, is probably where much of that was coming from. I also recognize that there are total limitations to the usefulness of data, right? And it's just that I think that, it's kind of an early example for dashboards in the county that really, have a different page for each goal area, and that there had been some sense of data set, some visual representation to start addressing information we know. No matter how sort of specific it may or may not be, but information we know right now, and that gives us a place to build off of. So I just want to make sure that y'all don't hear me advocating that that's a priority to go get a bunch of data up to date, but more ask the question. I think, I want to compliment that. I think some of that stuff is useful. And so as thinking about what the next iteration of a food system plan would look like, thinking about the types of, maybe there is more localized data that's possible to gather and aggregate and produce in a way that tells a better, different, more localized story. But that I think that feature is good and one worth looking back at, as you guys are working through the next iterations of redeveloping this plan. And then the other thing I'd say is, to your point, Connie, about how that there are definitely some parts of the food system plan that are active and functioning well and highly productive. To that, I would say, I think that does seem true. And maybe that's an opportunity to really zero in there and know where to push stuff off the list because it's addressed or being sort of focused on in other plans that the county has and other strategy areas, and that might. So I would just invite that doing a new iteration of a plan doesn't always mean you add additional goals or you add additional strategies. Sometimes you take some off the list, right? And you focus even more on the ones that have got some momentum and have been productive. So that's one commissioner's opinion about it. But I would just offer that as you all are thinking about what might your future guiding framework be, I don't think that it's true that more is always necessary or that more is better.
Thank you. One thing I will add, about the 10th anniversary of the food system plan is there's been a lot of discussion among council leadership to take this as an opportunity to reflect on what is going well, what still reflects the goals and the values of our county. And so one piece that we are looking to make sure is reflected in the overall food system plan is the work of the Indigenous Food System Study and Action Plan, in addition to adding or discussions around reflecting things like the Climate Action Plan and the Open Space Plan. But generally speaking, the 10th anniversary is also, we had the chance to convene, I think 2 weeks ago now, for our sort of goal setting for the year and so forth with the leaders of each working group as well as of the council. And we talked about general storytelling as well of some of the accomplishments of the council, being the most mature in the state and still a council that others across the state of Kansas look to as an example. Whether it's the Common Ground Garden Project or I work closely with the Culinary Commons Incubator Kitchen on the extension, or rather on the county fairgrounds. And both have a lot of data, a lot of stories to tell about empowering entrepreneurs, in some cases incubating folks that start small on the incubator farm that now operate 20 acres and, have received tens of thousands in USDA grants for developing their ag further. And so the ways that reflects on the county and our priorities, but also the accomplishments of the Douglas County Food Policy Council. It's been an exciting time for reflection, and we hope to capture some of that storytelling to share with you this year.
And I appreciate that example. Is that, because the question I was going to ask is on page 11 of the actual plan itself regarding policy 1.2.5. And it speaks to utilize the Lawrence Transient Guest Tax Program and Douglas County Natural Cultural Heritage Conservation Grant to support local food farms and agricultural heritage tourism activities. This could include the preservation of land and open space to maintain local assets. What you're talking about, is that an example of this policy in action? Or is this policy in action a different type of intervention or initiative? And or has this not yet come to fruition?
I think there have been examples of fruition. I believe the intention of that is to lift up existing mechanisms in our community to fund and support food systems initiatives where connections maybe previously were not made. So the HCC grant program, for example, heritage in Douglas County, you can mean a variety of things. It has parameters, but it's broad in terms of how we're demonstrating celebration of culture, and agriculture is one of those things. And so in promoting that opportunity as an avenue, maybe for agrotourism or research on agricultural heritage. I don't have it ready in my pocket, but I am pretty certain that there have been successful applications to HCC that were agriculture related. So while it may not have stemmed from this group, again, it is a community plan and potentially one of those stories we could connect to show that in action. Does that make sense?
It does,
Okay.
yes. And then has this, when we think about policy 1.2.5, are we also integrating the Lawrence TGT, the transient guest tax, into this work? Do we know if that has, and I'm getting a bunch of head shaking.
I am not aware that that's ever been exercised.
Yeah, I'm not sure that it is. Again, that would be a city decision ultimately. So the city council, the city of Lawrence would need to figure out how, that's a budgetary question. Again, the food systems plan is really meant to be this sort of convening conversation of really aspirational goals with some, tangible action items to go there. But that's not always to say that that's going to be things that the county is going to necessarily be the leader or the food policy council. Really, again, just the plan is meant to elevate that conversation to happen at the appropriate place. So in the instance of 1.25, that appropriate place would be the city of Lawrence.
Yes, I do see though that it is a collaborative policy effort. So it's utilize the Lawrence Transient Guest Tax Program and Douglas County Natural and Cultural Heritage Conservation grants to support. So that collaborative development of the policy, both parties, I'm assuming, came to the table to develop the policy. And then when you move forward with the implementation of a policy, ideally, both parties fund the work moving forward. So just kind of curious how that has come to be. And if it hasn't just yet, sometimes things, a plan is a plan. Sometimes things don't always. But I was just kind of curious. The example that you gave, I thought was great, Quinlan. So I was curious if that was just an example of this in action, because I was going to ask about it. So just something that I'll take that as a takeaway to follow up with some of the other commissioners to inquire as to policy 1.2.5, where we're at and maybe how we can get there. Thank you.
This might circle into where you're coming from there. So at the time when the Douglas County Food Plan was implemented, we had a shared sustainability office with the city of Lawrence. And so some of these things like transient guest tax, that made perfect sense because they were a total 50% partner at the table for that work. And now we have separate sustainability offices. So I'm wondering, as we're looking at, is there a time when we need an update to the food systems plan? Does that have an impact? The fact that we have separate sustainability offices now, would we be trying to make a document that fits other communities within our county, or is it kind of ours? Sorry, big questions.
A great question, and I think one that we would look for direction on and continue to explore. But would point out that it's still a joint City of Lawrence and Douglas County Food Policy Council as one of the chief collaborators in our food systems work. So I would imagine Lawrence would be a big part of that at least. And what, I'd certainly like to explore the conversation of being inclusive.
Does this City of Lawrence put certain numbers of people on the council, and the county does also, so roughly split?
It's 5 from the city of Lawrence and 8 from the county.
We're having this conversation because I had a similar sort of line of questions, or figured that would be a helpful topic of conversation for you all to hear us talk about. When there was the division of the sustainability offices and a split into 2 after having been combined for so many years, was part of the discussion amongst staff at that time whether that decision had impact on the Food Policy Council and the bylaws and appointments there, or did we really think about those as separate things? Which I'm just trying to understand for historical context, like, did we land somewhere specific on that piece of the conversation, or were we really looking at the sustainability offices and administration of those separate and apart from the Food Policy Council that had been developed collaboratively?
Kim, remind me, when did we actually do the split?
22?
22. I think it's right. Good. Yeah, we didn't, I remember us having conscious conversation about, we didn't want to necessarily change the makeup of the Food Policy Council at that time. There was a lot of productive work happening, and it seemed like, why mess with a good thing? And we really tried to maintain when we did the split, I called it a conscious uncoupling, because we really still do partner together on many, many things. And it was just to help us create some lines of clarity over kind of who led and championed certain projects, but there's still a great deal of collaboration between us and the City of Lawrence on that. So I think, we didn't necessarily it was that's my recollection, Kim, was it was things were going really well with the Food Policy Council. It was more to create a clarity amongst the staff on responsibilities and duties.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's my memory too. I did want to add that having county-focused sustainability staff has enabled us to really grow our relationships with the other cities in Douglas County. So even though they don't have someone with sustainability in their title necessarily, we have been able to really branch out and talk to them about things like our climate adaptation plan and our open space plan and other and and food systems. I think the food truck conversation, made it down to Baldwin, for example. So we are already, I say we, but Food System Plan, the Food Policy Council staff are already working across the county. I think the Food System Plan just has that kind of adoption label on it, and that's the only limitation.
That's helpful. And I think, I mean, I might just suggest that like, it's worth a circle back to consciously having a conversation about, and this is not me suggesting like a shift or a mix up in the makeup of the Food Policy Council by any means, but to your point, Kim, the fact that since the division of the administrative staff, it has given some capacity and space for county staff to build stronger, better relationships with other municipalities. And so I would just encourage that the new food system plan and whatever iteration it comes, and any maybe changes or updates to the Food Policy Council, the council's sort of makeup itself, is consciously talking about, does it make sense to engage the other cities or other parts of the community in a more, like in a named, meaningful way, and not just in a, we assume everybody's sort of aware and involved. So I would just encourage like filtering through some of those things and to determine, are there any seats, for example, on the council that would make sense to rethink what role that might fill, or could it or should it be there be representatives from other municipalities, things like that. And then I think also, in the content of a food systems plan, that hopefully some of the things that have come from that increased collaboration and relationship building can sort of be reflective of, or maybe feed into some of these goals as you're re-articulating them, and how it's not so specific to the programming that's in City of Lawrence and then everywhere else sort of thing, that we flip that on its head a little bit and name and talk about things that are specific to municipalities or specific to regions of the county, et cetera. And then one other piece of feedback I have about the guiding framework in general is just, there's the equitable food system section, and I think that's really where, when you go drill down further, it's talking a lot about access and accessibility to good and healthy food and things like that. I would encourage, I think access is a really powerful word personally, and so I would just maybe encourage to think about whether or not it makes sense to highlight that somewhere in these primary goals and framework, just because to me, so much of the work that the Food Policy Council has accomplished and has helped initiate in this community that's been taken on by other partners has like very fundamentally and tangibly increased access in different ways. And so I just want to reflect that. To me, that's really obvious. And so I think naming that, like access to foods and access to healthy foods, access to culturally relevant foods, just access in sort of all the forms. I just think it's a powerful word. And I think that a lot of the food system plan already speaks to that, but it's not necessarily like named and highlighted when you just go look at the quick list of the guiding framework. So something to think about.
I wanted to shout out, I mean, how much of this 5 points on the guiding framework, how much it dovetails into other county work. And I'm glad that it circles back to the concept of food through the Food Policy Council. And one of them I wanted to mention was the last point, reduction of food waste across the local food system. And in the solid waste management plan that we had a meeting this morning, Kim and Sean and I and 2 counties worth of partners about that idea of how do we allocate food waste to other streams, preferably for food use, but then once it becomes within the solid waste plan, where is that going, and how is that those nutrients not being lost to a landfill? What are some other options? So that's just a conversation that ties back into what we're looking at here, that the commission will get to hear more about as that unfolds. And the other, I know we've talked a couple times on this point, the conservation of natural resources and protection of working lands. And I kind of, go back to 2017 and the way we talked about, especially working lands was different there. We weren't talking about soil health in the same way that we know we need to now in terms of the soil ecology. So it's not just a question of being anti-growth and saying we have to always prioritize working lands or farmlands. It's that we're losing the quality of our working lands through neglect, through noxious weeds, through especially woody encroachment. There was a great podcast about the Green Glacier, about the growth of cedar trees in around. It's a huge fire hazard. So I just want to make sure that when we look at that working lands piece, that we're looking at the quality of the working lands and the quality of the ecology of those lands and how that plays into having the most nutrient dense food that we can get to people.
Great feedback. Thank you.
I appreciate the pivot that you made on SNAP benefits. And I think my hunch is that shows flexibility in the plan, that it's still aligned to what the goals were. And I'm interested, as we go forward, are there things that you're concerned about from the federal or state level that may impact the work that you do? I'm thinking maybe about workforce a little bit, or economic policies that are taking place that maybe the plan limits the work that you can do, or do you feel like it covers it enough?
Yeah, I think one positive thing that came from the workshop and the coalition building as SNAP benefits were coming down in late 2025. In 2026 was actually my first time I testified as staff for Douglas County. And that came directly from that coalition building. So all of the food security organizations that participated in that working group wrote letters to support our public schools with so they don't have additional administrative costs, which would decrease food access for free and reduced meals. So I think like there has been a lot of conversation about working together to support each other, because we realize that the policies federally and in the state really do affect all of our work, not just in advancing our food system plan or county health improvement plan, but just our day-to-day work and serving our Douglas County residents, especially the ones that are most in need. So in a small way, it did change how we work as a collective and advocate for each other's, our work, I would say, not each other's work, but it's our county's work in supporting most vulnerable populations. But I would be very interested to hear on how you see staff and the Food Policy Council continue to move forward as things may change.
So my bit of feedback there is I would encourage you, as you think about those goals, to think about what role we play in advocacy at the state and federal level when policies come into conflict with how we think to best serve our Douglas County residents. So, I think there is some in there about advocacy, but maybe a little stronger strength and I think it's good to be advocating at the state and the federal level for what we need here, and to be thoughtful about how to mobilize when we need to mobilize that advocacy.
Thank you.
Agreed. And I would just add the safety net when we think about the donut hole that we know a lot of individuals have a tendency to fall into, to ensure that we are for sure making sure that that message is getting to the right individuals at all levels of government. And to then add on to what Commissioner Kelly is saying, when you're looking at, or if you're going to look at changing or reframing this particular policy document, goal number 3, we build and design our communities to ensure food access and foster health. I would be super interested to know or better understand what does that look like for the design for Douglas County overall? And what does health mean, right? So does it mean that we are lowering comorbidities? Does it mean that our food system is truly set up to bridge that health gap, to truly bring healthy food options to people so that that those food deserts, right, are less and that people can truly access healthy food and culturally healthy food for them that they really want to eat, and then they know how to cook that food, and it's affordable to them, and they have the right supplies to actually do something with the food that they actually receive. And then back to schools. Free and reduced lunch. Yes, it's necessary, but what are we feeding them? So when we think about the food that it's actually on their plate, can they study? What is it full of? Does it actually feed their brains? The gut to brain connection? Are we actually setting them up for success in school, out of school, at home? And then when they do go home, the food that's on their plate at home, is that setting them up for success? To go to bed, to have a healthy sleep pattern, to get up in the morning, have a healthy meal, breakfast, whether at school or at home, and then to be ready to sit in a chair and to study because we know that they're sitting again. And if all they're eating is sugar and strawberry milk and donuts and first breakfast and then second breakfast, that is not setting our students up for success. And then we know we've taken away gym. We've taken away all sorts of forms of exercise. So we've got to have healthy meals. And at least for this commissioner, that doesn't mean we strip nutrients and we put nutrients back into our food and we call it food.
I think the linkages between the community health improvement plan too, the work that there's plank in the community health improvement plan, that's really, I think, a lot of that, things started in the food system plan and are now living in the community health improvement plan. You might talk a little bit about your all's engagement in that process.
Yes, the Food Policy Council has actually one of our council members, Shelby Ostrom, who is our liaison from Lawrence Douglas County Public Health, has been leading the working group that advances and shaping the Douglas County Health Improvement Plan. So we, along with Emily Lysing at the time when she was a board member, worked on the food security section of the CHIP with LiveWell, K-State, and all of our partners. So we have been really active since the beginning of drafting that plan and implementing and shifting focus as policies are changing. And members of that group also include our public schools, including folks who directly work with food service. Mhm.
One more comment to share, which is just that I'm really looking forward to the final report for the Indigenous Food System Study and Action Plan. And I won't put you on the spot to talk more about that now, since we'll get a final report later this year. But I think I am, and I think I heard you say this earlier, Quinlan, that, in looking at the next iteration and update of this food system plan, that really integrating this Indigenous food systems study and action plan seems to be like, that might be a sort of an early identified goal. And I would encourage that it's a unique thing that this community is doing. And I think that it really builds on the foundation of the food system plan and the maturity that you've spoken to so much about the Food Policy Council here and the work that has been started and developed and maintained. That this is a really unique and intentional way of exhibiting all of those things, but in a very specific and focused way that I think helps tell the story about why all of these goals that we've been talking about this evening and that are identified, why they matter and why they are all connected and why they go towards a healthy, sustainable community. And I think that having really elevating this action plan in the next iteration of the food systems plan. I'm looking forward to that and hope that it's something that continues to be highlighted, because I think I'm looking forward to what this says final report, but I'm going to call it an initial report expected later this year, will sort of tell us about some actionable opportunities in this community to really elevate the fact that we're unique here. We have a very diverse tribal community, indigenous community made up of multiple tribal nations. And I just think that there's something very special about that. And then I don't want that to get lost or just sort of put away after we get through this study and action plan. That I hope that that's a through line that we continue to talk about for future years here as the commission, and that the community can see some tangible results of whatever that might look like, whether there's the opportunity to, for Haskell students who are here, who are very far away from regions and lands and foods that they're used to. What does that mean, and what opportunities are there to bridge that gap, to increase access, or to just recognize that is part of our community, and it's a unique thing in our community. And to the point that you made earlier, Connie, that like we do have such geographical proximity to the 4 tribes in Kansas. And so I think that is something that is also an opportunity for our community to, how does Douglas County reflect that fact? Like, where is the visibility for those tribal nations and the resources that are available, including food resources? And I know I've brought this up in previous meetings before, but thinking about the Iowa Nation in particular, like in White Cloud, there's so many food initiatives and things that they have been doing. And there's not much visibility of that here in Douglas County still, right? Those products are not widely available in the markets here. There's not a booth at any of the farmers markets per se. And I'm just throwing out just examples of how some folks know about those resources and the proximity of them, but there's not strong visibility in the community. So I'm just looking forward to some tangible opportunities, and I hope that it really continues to be sort of a core focus of the Food Policy Council moving forward.
Thank you. I'm actually very excited about this work. I also would like to mention that I think we have the privilege of working with Brett Ramey as leading this work from the Iowa Tribe of Kansas and Nebraska, and his decades of food systems work in land stewardship. And along with Alex Kimball Williams and Robert Hicks, who was a farmer at the Incubator Farm, and along also with Christina Haswood, with so much leadership and policy experience. I think that team is going to do incredible work. I'm really excited to see what's coming from it. But also our office, working with our interns, as attached on the agenda report, the work of Star Harmony Horses, the preliminary report, working closely with the Kansas tribes, and having communications, having interviewed them, building relationships, and already providing some recommendations that would influence this work is really exciting. And also, just going back to what Erica had mentioned about working with, across the county and the maturity of the Food Policy Council, I think that we are at a really good time that we have been building relationships since the beginning of the Food Council. And there's so much energy and space to just grow those relationships, whether it's with Eudora Parks and Rec or Baldwin, all those cities and unincorporated areas that are advancing our food system, as well as the 4 Kansas tribes. So just continuing to build those relationships and advancing our food system together.
Well, thank you all. We really appreciate the information and the discussion. Commissioners, any other burning questions for the moment for this team or feedback? Okay, seeing nothing more for now. Thank you again for your time. We look forward to the next conversation, and we are recessed until our 5:30 business meeting.